This episode contains content that could be triggering for some. Please take care while listening.
A Colorado law is coming up at the United States Supreme Court. This law started with a Democratic push years ago. It prevents therapists from trying to change children's sexual orientation or gender identity or expression.
For years, Colorado Democrats heard how harmful this practice known as conversion therapy could be.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, committee, for being here to participate in what is a critical hearing on a bill that also will save lives.
The bill failed 4 years in a row. Then, during the 2019 session, Democrats had control of both the House and the Senate.
I know that we in this committee often deal with challenging, charged, emotional issues, and trying to figure out how to save the health and welfare of our community.
At its first hearing, dozens of people came to testify, and some shared deeply personal stories about how conversion therapy has affected them.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairperson and members of the committee. My name is Brad Allen Rubendale, and I'm representing myself today.
Brad Rubendale told committee members he grew up in a conservative Christian family and said when he was 19, he acknowledged to himself that he's gay. He confided in his brother. He wanted to not be gay.
We did research to get rid of this problem that had long haunted me, condemning me to hell. We discovered a group called
Rubendale said he and his brother found a group that claimed to change people's sexual orientation. He ordered books and went to therapy.
Now, Rubendale was an adult, so even if Colorado's ban had been in place back then, it wouldn't have applied to him. But he wanted to testify to try to save others from going through it.
My therapist diagnosed reasons I was attracted to certain body parts and pathologized my attractions.
He said the shame he felt during therapy became unbearable.
So I made a plan. I isolated myself. It would look like an accident. I was not going to leave a note, just a destroyed car and another dead gay Christian.
Rubendale told lawmakers the conversion therapy nearly robbed him of his life. But after more than a decade struggling with the situation, he had a breakthrough that being gay wasn't wrong or toxic. And he said the darkness in his mind parted. At that moment, he knew he would survive. But getting past the shame he learned in therapy hasn't been easy.
I pray daily that the deadly and discredited practice of, quote, conversion therapy would be banned forever so that LGBTQ people can stop hating themselves, stop shaming themselves, and stop killing themselves in the name of therapy.
Major psychology governing bodies have discredited the practice of trying to change a person's sexual orientation or gender expression and say it's harmful.
At the time Colorado debated this bill, it wasn't all that controversial. It even had the backing of some prominent Republicans, including Colorado's then Attorney General Cynthia Kaufman.
Those who make claims that they can reverse or cure a young person who is LGBTQ are in fact committing a fraud on the people of Colorado. And worse than that, they are harming young people in this state who identify as LGBTQ.
But other conservatives did strongly oppose it. Jeff Johnston testified that he used conversion therapy himself and is happy to be married to a woman with 3 sons together.
I oppose denying that help to others who want it. I find efforts to do so offensive. As a culture and policy analyst at Focus on the Family, I also represent tens of thousands of our Colorado constituents and millions more across the U.S. We oppose House Bill 191129 for many reasons.
The bill cleared its committee that day with bipartisan support. A few months later, Governor Jared Polis signed it into law.
This will help so many people in Colorado to make sure that no one can be forced to attend a tortuous conversion therapy pseudoscience practice.
But just 3 years later, a Colorado Springs counselor challenged the law. She argued that it violates her freedom of speech.
I help people who come to see me have conversations to clarify what their goals and their values are and to identify the ways in which they would like to live a life that is more fulfilling and more satisfying and more in line with who God created them to be.
The case brings up questions about free speech and the authority of states to regulate medical practices.
It's also just one of a string of challenges to Colorado's LGBTQ protections, all from the same conservative legal powerhouse, and with the potential to shape laws around the country. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics and policy. I'm Benta Birkeland.
And I'm Caitlin Kim. For this episode, you'll get the backstory on Colorado's conversion therapy law and how it ended up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. The challenges come from the Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative legal powerhouse that has won more than a dozen Supreme Court cases in recent years, including playing a major role in overturning Roe v. Wade.
And a couple of ADF's wins have come against Colorado.
And this latest challenge examines a constitutional free speech question, whether a therapist who engages in conversion therapy is exercising their protected free speech, or if that treatment counts as regulated medical conduct. The Supreme Court hears oral arguments October 7th.
With that, let's start with the state law at the center of this.
Colorado wasn't the tip of the spear when it comes to restricting conversion therapy. More than a dozen states had already done it by the time the Colorado Statehouse took up the issue in 2019. Benta, you've reported on some of the very contentious bills on LGBTQ issues in recent years, but from what you mentioned a few minutes ago, this conversion therapy ban wasn't one of them. Why do you think this was?
I think there are a couple reasons here. One thing to note, it passed on its fifth try. So for 5 years in a row, this had been debated in the Capitol. It cleared the Democratic House. It failed in the Republican-controlled Senate. So people were familiar with the arguments around it. I talked to Democratic Representative Brianna Titone, who was at the Capitol then. She wasn't the main sponsor of this bill, but she is the state's only transgender lawmaker, and she strongly supported it.
I think because that bill and all the people who were there so many times, it wasn't a blockbuster kind of a policy. And compared to some of the other things that we've had where tempers have gotten high and there's been name calling and yelling, this never really got to that level. And the policy had a lot of ways for people to still be able to do it through their religious channels.
And that seems like a key point. The law doesn't allow a licensed therapist to practice conversion therapy with a minor, but a family could still try a different approach, like going to their minister or a family friend for informal counseling.
Titone told me that wasn't a carve-out all of the backers were happy with. Some people wanted no one to be allowed to try to change a minor's sexual orientation, but they limited the scope of the bill with the Constitution in mind.
A lot of people were upset that this was a concession that we made. But because we were trying to honor the First Amendment and make sure we were having a policy that was going to hold up, that was a concession that was made to avoid that free speech argument.
But some conservative Christians say the law has been restrictive, and their objections to it are part of a larger view that Colorado and America are becoming too sexually liberal.
I spoke with Jordan Lawrence. He's an attorney with the First Liberty Institute. This is a conservative Christian advocacy organization headquartered in Texas. And Lawrence says Colorado shouldn't restrict people who want help aligning their gender identity or sexual orientation with their religious beliefs. He believes it's not compassionate to deny a child or their family the freedom to pursue their own counseling goals.
Many people believe that we're born male or female, and that these are unchangeable biological realities. And people who choose to live consistent with those beliefs and their biological sex are entitled to the help of professional counselors as they work through this difficult process.
So we should note that the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality as a mental health disorder from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders in the 1970s.
And that goes back to these conversion therapy bans in a lot of states. Backers of these kinds of bills passed them because of mistreatment and harm that people, particularly minors, suffered in some cases from forced conversion therapy. So for them, it is not about speech or the First Amendment. It's about medical practices.
Now, opponents of conversion therapy include major psychological associations who say the treatment is not supported by credible evidence. They point to research that has largely shown the practice to be ineffective and harmful, contributing to anxiety, self-blame, and hatred, and it can increase risk for suicidal ideation and suicides.
It takes your own internalized homophobia and then turns your own mind against yourself by giving a framework that sounds reasonable.
For Brad Rubendale, who we heard testifying at that hearing at the start of the episode, this isn't about so-called culture wars. It's about real-world harms like what he experienced.
I reached out to him recently to hear more about his experiences, and as he testified, it was his choice to go through conversion therapy, but he felt like the counselor he went to did not act in good faith because they never mentioned that there's no science to support this approach.
I think that what was missing is the data that it doesn't work, and the data that it can actually cause serious mental health issues for people who go through that. And I think it's not just a viewpoint, it's a dangerous mental space to be in.
When he was going through this therapy, he said one of the hardest things was feeling like he was always on the edge of making this change and this breakthrough and then never getting there.
It was the idea that if you do this work correctly, your actual orientation will change. That was what was so damaging about it.
And it took him years to get over that experience. And now for him to see this legal challenge reach all the way to the nation's highest court, Rubendale says it feels like society is moving backwards.
I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not. As I've been watching what's happened the last several years, it kind of fits in line with everything that we're seeing related to trans rights being regressed, and then also women's rights and healthcare being torn down. There's just so many things that are happening that it just seems like the next thing, of course.
Which brings us back to the U.S. Supreme Court and what we can expect to hear from those arguing for and against Colorado's conversion therapy ban. That's next.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance. Hey, Purplish fans. You rely on us to find the big picture behind political headlines. Now Purplish is a finalist for a Signal Award. It's a big deal in podcasting. You can control who brings home the Listener's Choice honor. Head to vote.signalawards.com. Again, vote.signalawards.com. and cast your ballot for Purplish in the local news category. Thanks for your support. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
Childs versus Salazar. That's the official name of the case that could determine the fate of Colorado's state law and potentially other state laws that ban conversion therapy for minors. As we've touched on, the driving question in this case is, can a state law prevent therapists from counseling a client into changing their sexual orientation or gender identity? Does that fall under medical regulations, or does it violate the right to free speech? The defendant is Kaylee Childs, a licensed professional counselor and a Christian. She's suing Patty Salazar, the head of the State Department that handles professional licensing in Colorado. Childs argues that the law violates how she wants to live out her faith in her life, including her work, both her freedom of speech and her freedom of religion.
So, to be clear, she's not a licensed psychiatrist and she doesn't prescribe any medication.
That's correct. And Jake Warner is a senior counsel with the Alliance for Defending Freedom, and he's one of her attorneys. He says the 2019 law only allows counselors to assist anyone who is, quote, undergoing gender transition or same-sex attraction, but doesn't let counselors assist people who want something else.
It forbids counselors from helping kids regain comfort with their biological sex, and that's viewpoint discrimination, and it censors speech in violation of the First Amendment.
So Warner's arguing that Colorado's law is illegally regulating speech. But I think what's kind of tricky here is that speech therapy is a job. Talk therapy is a regulated medical practice. People go to school for it, they train for it, they need a license to practice in the state.
Exactly. And I asked Warner about this, and he thinks free speech is free speech.
Just because a state wants to label speech something different, whether it's conduct or treatments or anything else, the First Amendment, all it deals with is speech. It doesn't make exceptions for other kinds of speech.
Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, not surprisingly, disagrees. The state's argument is that therapy, by talking to people with a licensed therapist, is in fact medical conduct. And that's something the state can and does regulate.
Colorado, like every state, regulates substandard care through its malpractice laws and through a licensing system that says if you're providing care that is harmful, you can be disciplined for it.
Now, Weiser says the case is about preventing professionals from using a discredited medical approach, not stifling free speech.
We are acting in the way that states have always done to protect our consumers. And the idea that there could be some First Amendment attack on this is unprecedented and dangerous.
And Weiser added, again, there's nothing in Colorado's law that prevents a therapist from having conversations that are about a child's sexual orientation or why they may want to get comfortable with their biological sex. What's not allowed is to pressure or tell a minor to be someone other than who they are. And again, the state law is focused on minors. There's nothing stopping them from seeking out conversion therapy when they turn 18.
One thing that's interesting about this case is that Kaylee Childs, the counselor who filed the lawsuit, the woman from Colorado Springs, she hasn't actually been directly affected by the ban yet. She hasn't lost her license or anything like that.
That's right. This is known as a preemptive challenge. Childs wants the court to strike down the law before it could theoretically impact her.
Kaylee Childs does argue on this website explaining the case that she started censoring herself in conversations with clients out of fear of violating Colorado's law. But for those who do not support her lawsuit, they find the whole thing concerning that she hasn't really been impacted by the law yet. I spoke with one person who said it's a cooked-up case that didn't arise organically and feels that it's a real shame an issue this important is coming from such an artificial, abstract context.
Yeah, and Attorney General Weiser says he hopes the theoretical nature of ADF's claims will ultimately strengthen the state's case.
The court is hearing a case where the allegations are hypothetical, where the issues are hypothesized, and the plaintiff hasn't actually been affected by the law at issue. This is not the type of situation that the Supreme Court normally addresses, and where you have a lack of underlying facts or a record of what actually happened, the room for error goes up.
Ultimately, the question before the court is, does Colorado's law regulate conduct, or does it violate the free speech clause of the First Amendment?
And how the court decides to define speech versus professional conduct is really at the heart of this case. Let's talk a little bit about the group Alliance Defending Freedom that is behind this lawsuit. It's a conservative legal advocacy group. They've been around for about 30 years. The group fights for conservative Christian causes, and one of the founders was James Dobson.
He was a well-known evangelical Christian author, psychologist, and founder of Focus on the Family, an organization headquartered in Colorado Springs that promotes what they call traditional Christian family values.
For this conversation, one thing that's really important to remember is that ADF has had a string of successes at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes, that ADF attorney on this latest case, Jake Warner, says they've had 16 wins at the U.S. Supreme Court since 2011. Now, that's a strong track record.
I think the most notable case has to be the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. A lot of people have looked into this organization. Our colleague did some reporting on ADF a few years ago, and the group has thousands of allied attorneys across the country, staff in Washington, D.C. and Arizona. And there was also a profile in The New Yorker about ADF. That reporter, David Kirkpatrick, said, in the decades since its founding, the group has really led the way on building a Christian conservative legal movement. Here he is in an interview with Fresh Air about his reporting.
And they looked at a world where there was a constitutional right to abortion, where there were significant barriers between church and state, and they set out to undo both of those things. 30 years later, both of those Supreme Court precedents are overturned. They've become extraordinarily successful, and in some ways, they are looking for the next battle. And I think in that context, they are also reaching out to an increasingly broad audience, as any group does as it tries to continue to raise money and grow over time.
And it sounds like, based on Kirkpatrick's reporting, ADF has built a pretty sound strategy to achieve its goals.
And one reason why I felt comfortable saying that they are now the most influential part of the Christian conservative movement is they're not just, taking on a client who comes to them needing help. They're actually reaching out to legislatures in states around the country and saying, we'd like to help you draft some legislation. In this case, they helped the state of Mississippi draft the abortion ban, which was later challenged in the case that ultimately overturned Roe. Then they acted as lawyers for Mississippi, defending that all the way up to the Supreme Court. And even before that, they'd been laying the groundwork for this for decades.
But when it comes to some of the Colorado laws ADF has challenged, they've been centered around LGBTQ rights. For instance, the cake decorator in Lakewood in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the baker refused to design a cake for a same-sex couple celebrating their wedding. Then there was the Colorado website designer who didn't want to create wedding websites for same-sex couples.
That's right. LGBTQ issues have been a real focus for the legal organization as of late. The Southern Poverty Law Center has designated the ADF an anti-LGBT hate group. I asked Warner about that. He's the ADF attorney that I spoke with, and he said the center is a biased, discredited advocacy group. He said his group advocates for the freedom of expression of all Americans.
I think many LGBTQ people would disagree with that. They point to that graphic designer case in Colorado in the Supreme Court decision and said that essentially means religious beliefs make it okay to discriminate against gay people.
Well, one thing is certain, the stakes are high for this case. This isn't the only case challenging a state's conversion therapy ban, and so far, the lower courts have been split on whether the law is constitutional, which is why the U.S. Supreme Court is weighing in now.
Depending on how broad the justices rule, this case could have an impact on nearly half the states in the country that ban conversion therapy for minors. And one thing that feels important to raise in all of this is that conversion therapy is a fairly broad term. We've talked about this, but it's not just sexual orientation. It's also gender identity and gender expression. So that means it gets into the trans rights discussion as well.
Right. And in recent years, the debate over trans rights has been more and more at the forefront of political discussions. You think of a growing body of legislation around, like banning trans athletes from competing on team sports that match their gender identity, or, which bathrooms people can use.
For many LGBTQ advocates, they're worried this Colorado case could roll back protections for LGBTQ youth. Shannon Minter is the legal director for the National Center for LGBTQ Rights in San Francisco. He says he hopes the Supreme Court will take the voices involved in this issue seriously and look at the law carefully.
The worst thing that could happen is for the court to view these laws through some sort of current politicized lens. We're all so divided now. There's such a toxic political environment, especially there's so much anti-LGBT sentiment being voiced now. And these laws are they're just about protecting vulnerable young people and families in ways that, up until very recently, people this has not been seen as a Democratic issue or Republican issue.
He points to a recent case out of Tennessee, and this is where the Supreme Court upheld that state's ban on gender-affirming care for minors. That case looked at it from the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, and gender-affirming care is not the same as conversion therapy, and this Colorado case is a First Amendment case, but Minter still sees the Tennessee case and the Colorado cases as related.
Colorado Attorney General Weiser understands why people might be worried about Colorado's law not being upheld, and that the court could look at this through an ideological lens.
This case is an opportunity for the court to demonstrate its commitment to following the rule of law, acting in a principled way and not to get out front of its headlights where it doesn't even have a factual record. And we're going to be making that point forcefully at the court. I still believe that we need a Supreme Court and a judicial system that is grounded in principled decision-making.
The ADF also feels like it has a strong case, and they'll have the backing of the federal government because the Trump administration supports the ADF's case. Now, ADF lawyer Warner says if the law is upheld, the government can start regulating the speech of anyone it licenses, from hairstylists to doctors.
But for people like Brad Rubendale, who went through conversion therapy as an adult by choice, no matter what the Supreme Court decides, he hopes people realize that conversion therapy can take a serious and dangerous mental health toll on youth and on families that go through it.
If you are struggling with your sexuality or trans or anything else that's making you question whether it's okay to be alive, please stay alive and please find your people, because we exist out there. You just got to connect with them.
That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Caitlin Kim.
And I'm Benta Birkland. Our producer is Stephanie Wolf. Editing from Megan Verlee and Rachel Estabrook. Sound design and engineering by Shane Rumsey. Our theme music is by Brad Turner. Special thanks to WHYY and Fresh Air for allowing us to use some clips in this episode.
Purplish will be back in your feeds in 2 weeks. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode.
This is Purplish from listener-supported CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.